The courthouse stood tall and imposing against the clear blue sky of spring 2023, its marble steps worn smooth by countless footsteps of those seeking justice. Among them was Mrs. Chen, a single mother who worked 2 jobs to provide for her daughter, Lily. That morning, they climbed those steps together, Lily's small hand wrapped tightly around her mother's fingers, her other arm clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. They were there for what should have been a routine custody hearing. Mrs. Chen had filed for full custody after her ex-husband had repeatedly failed to attend his scheduled visitations, leaving little Lily waiting by the window every other weekend. The pain of seeing her daughter's disappointment had finally pushed Mrs. Chen to take legal action. The morning started like any other at the courthouse. The security guard at the entrance gave Lily a kind smile as she passed through the metal detector, even pretending to scan her stuffed rabbit to make her giggle. But the lightness of that moment would soon be overshadowed by what awaited them in courtroom 7. Judge Richard Harrison had earned a reputation over his 15 years on the bench. While some praised his strict adherence to protocol, others whispered about his harsh demeanor and quick temper. That day, his courtroom was particularly crowded, with several cases on the docket before the Chens. As they waited, Mrs. Chen quietly helped Lily with her coloring book, trying to keep her occupied. The little girl had already been up since 5 that morning, too excited and nervous about her new dress, the one she'd specifically chosen for meeting the important judge, as she'd put it. When their case was finally called, Mrs. Chen straightened Lily's dress one last time before approaching the bench. The air in the courtroom felt heavy, thick with tension as Judge Harrison peered down at them over his reading glasses. His first words set the tone for what would become an unforgettable morning. "Mrs. Chen," he began, his voice carrying a note of disdain that made several observers shift uncomfortably in their seats. "I see you're requesting full custody, despite your unusual work schedule." He emphasized the word unusual in a way that made it sound like an accusation. Mrs. Chen stood straight, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Yes, Your Honor. I work as a nurse during the day and pick up evening shifts at a local restaurant to provide for my daughter." The judge's response was immediate and harsh. "And you think that's an appropriate environment for raising a child? Shuffling her between babysitters while you're off working at all hours?" Lily, not fully understanding the tension but sensing her mother's distress, tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy," she whispered, just loud enough to be heard in the quiet courtroom, "you're the best mommy. You make me breakfast every morning, even when you're tired." Instead of being moved by this innocent display of love, Judge Harrison's face darkened. "Young lady," he snapped, causing Lily to flinch, "children do not speak in my courtroom unless spoken to. And certainly not in." He paused, looking pointedly at Lily's traditional Chinese dress, such casual attire. The courtroom fell silent. Several attorneys present exchanged concerned glances. Mrs. Chen's hand trembled as she placed it protectively on Lily's shoulder, but her voice remained dignified. "Your Honor, this is my daughter's traditional dress. She wanted to show respect for the court by wearing it today." The judge's response would soon spark a chain of events that would shake the foundations of the local justice system, but at that moment, no one could have predicted just how far the ripples of this confrontation would spread. In the gallery, a young law clerk quietly opened her laptop and began typing, her face set in grim determination. Among the observers, a senior attorney who had been waiting for his own case reached for his phone, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen as he composed an urgent message to the State Judicial Review Board. The morning had started with a simple custody hearing, but it was about to become much more than that, a test of character, justice, and the very principles upon which the legal system was built. The tension in courtroom 7 had reached a breaking point. Lily's small shoulders trembled as she pressed closer to her mother, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly against her chest. The judge's words hung heavy in the air, but Mrs. Chen refused to be broken by them. Her years of working double shifts, of kissing Lily goodnight even when exhausted, of creating a loving home despite all obstacles, these memories steeled her resolve. "Your Honor," Mrs. Chen began again, her voice carrying the quiet strength of countless mothers before her, "I understand your concerns about my work schedule. But every decision I've made has been for my daughter's well-being. She's thriving in school, involved in community activities, and Judge Harrison cut her off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Mrs. Chen, I've seen countless cases like yours. Single parents who think they can manage everything alone, who put their children through unstable situations because of their cultural differences in child-rearing." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the courtroom. The young law clerk, Ms. Rodriguez, was now openly recording every word in her laptop, her jaw set in determination. The senior attorney in the gallery, Mr. Thompson, had already sent 3 messages to his contacts at the State Judicial Review Board. But it was what happened next that would change everything. Lily, still holding her rabbit close, took a small step forward. Despite her mother's gentle attempt to pull her back, she looked up at the towering bench. Her voice was small but clear, carrying the pure honesty that only a child could possess. "My mommy teaches me to be proud of who I am," she said. "She says being different is what makes America beautiful." The judge's face flushed a deep red. "Young lady, I've already warned you about speaking out of turn. This kind of disrespect for court procedures is exactly what I'm talking about. Mrs. Chen, your inability to control your child's behavior is concerning." At that moment, the courtroom doors opened, and a distinguished-looking woman in her 60s entered quietly, taking a seat in the back row. Few noticed her arrival, but those who did recognized Chief Judge Beverly Williams of the State Supreme Court, known for her surprise courtroom observations. Mrs. Chen squared her shoulders, drawing on every ounce of dignity she possessed. "Your Honor, my daughter speaks from her heart, as children do. She excels in school, participates in community service at age 5, and has perfect attendance in her kindergarten class. These achievements come from stability and love, not instability." Judge Harrison's response was immediate and harsh. "Love doesn't put food on the table, Mrs. Chen. Your community's tendency to prioritize so-called family values over practical considerations Objection, Your Honor." A new voice rang out clearly through the courtroom. The senior attorney, Mr. Thompson, had risen to his feet. "As an officer of the court, I feel compelled to point out that these comments appear to violate several judicial conduct codes." The judge's face contorted with anger. "You're out of order, Counselor. This isn't your case." "Perhaps not," came a calm voice from the back of the courtroom. Chief Judge Williams stood, her presence commanding immediate attention. "But I believe we've heard enough." The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted dramatically. Judge Harrison's face drained of color as he recognized his superior. But before anyone could speak further, something unexpected happened that would be remembered by everyone present. Lily, still standing brave despite her tears, reached into her small purse and pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper. "I made this for you, Judge," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "My teacher says when someone's angry, maybe they just need to see some kindness." It was a child's drawing, showing a diverse group of people holding hands around what appeared to be a courthouse. At the top, in wobbly kindergarten letters, were the words, "Everyone belongs." The silence that followed was deafening. Chief Judge Williams slowly made her way to the front of the courtroom, her expression a mixture of sadness and determination. The young law clerk, Ms. Rodriguez, had captured everything, including this final, powerful moment that would later become a symbol of something much larger than a single custody case. As Chief Judge Williams approached the bench, she paused beside Lily and Mrs. Chen. "Young lady," she said gently, "would you mind if I keep that drawing? I think we need it in this courthouse as a reminder of what justice truly means." The events that would unfold in the next few hours would shake the local judicial system to its core, but in that moment, it was the quiet dignity of a 5-year-old girl and her mother that spoke volumes about courage, respect, and the true meaning of American values. The events that unfolded in the next hour transformed the routine morning at the courthouse into a watershed moment for the local justice system. Chief Judge Williams stood at the center of Courtroom 7, her presence bringing a gravity to the proceedings that had been missing under Judge Harrison's prejudiced oversight. "This court will take a 30-minute recess," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of her authority. "Judge Harrison, I need to see you in chambers immediately." As they left, she turned to Mrs. Chen and Lily. "Please don't leave the courthouse. We'll resume your case shortly, with a different judge presiding." In the hallway outside, the story of what had transpired spread quickly through the courthouse. Legal assistants, other judges, and attorneys gathered in small groups, their whispered conversations painting a picture of a system at a crossroads. The young law clerk, Ms. Rodriguez, found herself surrounded by colleagues as she compiled her detailed notes of the morning's events. Mrs. Chen and Lily sat on a wooden bench in the corridor, sharing a small pack of crackers they'd brought for lunch. A group of court staff members watched from a distance, moved by the sight of the mother and daughter supporting each other through this ordeal. One court officer approached them with cups of water and fresh cookies from the break room. "My daughter wears traditional dress too," the officer said warmly to Lily. "She just graduated from law school last month." She smiled at Mrs. Chen. "You're raising her right. Don't let anyone tell you different." Meanwhile, in the chief judge's chambers, a different scene was unfolding. The ornate room, usually a place of quiet contemplation, now crackled with tension. Judge Harrison sat rigidly in a chair, his earlier arrogance replaced by a defensive stillness as Chief Judge Williams reviewed the morning's transcript, provided by Ms. Rodriguez. "Richard," she began, her voice heavy with disappointment, "I've known you for 15 years. We've worked together, attended the same conferences, shared meals. Never did I imagine I would witness what I saw today." "Beverly," he started, but she held up her hand. "No, you need to listen now. This isn't about a simple breach of judicial conduct. What I witnessed today goes against everything our justice system stands for." She placed Lily's drawing on the desk between them. A 5-year-old child showed more wisdom about American values than a sitting judge. In the courthouse cafeteria, Mr. Thompson was on a conference call with the State Judicial Review Board. His voice carried quietly but firmly as he detailed the morning's events. "Yes, I have witnesses. Multiple witnesses. And the law clerk has everything documented, including timestamps and direct quotes." Back in the hallway, something unexpected was happening. Other families waiting for their cases began approaching Mrs. Chen. A grandmother from Vietnam shared her own story of raising grandchildren while working multiple jobs. A father from Guatemala spoke about his journey through the legal system. Each story was different, but they all shared a common thread of resilience and hope. Lily, still holding her stuffed rabbit, listened to these stories with wide eyes. She tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, we're not alone anymore," she whispered, showing wisdom beyond her years. Mrs. Chen hugged her daughter close, tears gleaming in her eyes. The morning's humiliation was being transformed into something powerful, a moment of community, of shared strength, of voices finally being heard. Around noon, a court officer approached them with news. Their case would be heard by Judge Patricia Waters, known for her fair-minded approach and extensive experience in family court. But before they could proceed, there was something else they needed to know. Judge Harrison had been temporarily suspended from the bench, pending a full investigation by the Judicial Review Board. His cases would be redistributed among other judges, and a thorough review of his past decisions would be conducted, particularly those involving minority families. The news spread through the courthouse like wildfire. Legal professionals who had witnessed similar behavior but felt powerless to act began coming forward. Ms. Rodriguez's detailed documentation would become crucial evidence in the investigation that followed. As Mrs. Chen and Lily waited to enter the new courtroom, a reporter from the local newspaper approached them respectfully. She had heard about the morning's events and wanted to share their story. Mrs. Chen hesitated, thinking carefully about the implications. "Will it help other families?" she asked. "Will it help make things better?" The reporter nodded solemnly. "Your story could change how our justice system treats families like yours. It could help ensure that no other child faces what Lily faced today." Lily looked up at her mother, still clutching her rabbit. "Mommy always says we should help others when we can," she said softly. Mrs. Chen smiled at her daughter's words, amazed at how this difficult morning had transformed into an opportunity for positive change. She agreed to share their story, but with one condition, that it would focus not just on the discrimination they faced, but on the community that rallied around them and the changes it sparked in the system. As they prepared to enter Judge Waters' courtroom, the atmosphere was markedly different from the morning. The same courthouse that had felt cold and intimidating now hummed with the energy of positive change. Sometimes, it takes the innocent wisdom of a child to remind adults of their duty to uphold justice fairly for all. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of courtroom 12, casting a warm glow that felt worlds apart from the cold atmosphere of the morning's proceedings. Judge Patricia Waters sat at the bench, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she carefully reviewed the case file before her. Unlike the imposing presence of Judge Harrison, she created an atmosphere of calm professionalism. "Mrs. Chen," Judge Waters began, her voice carrying warmth without sacrificing authority, "I've reviewed your case file, including the unfortunate events from this morning. First, I want to apologize on behalf of this court for what you and your daughter experienced. That's not what our justice system stands for." Mrs. Chen sat straighter in her chair, touched by the simple humanity of the judge's words. Lily, still by her side, looked up at Judge Waters with curious eyes, no longer afraid. "Now," the judge continued, "let's focus on the actual matter at hand, your petition for full custody." She turned a page in the file. "I see here that you've provided extensive documentation of your ex-husband's missed visitations, as well as records of Lily's school attendance and activities. The proceedings that followed showed how justice should work." Judge Waters asked thorough but respectful questions about Mrs. Chen's work schedule, but instead of criticism, she showed interest in the support system Mrs. Chen had built. The judge learned about Mrs. Wang, their elderly neighbor who loved having Lily over for traditional Chinese lessons after school. She heard about the community center's after-school program where Lily participated in art classes while Mrs. Chen worked her evening shifts. "Your Honor," Mrs. Chen explained, her voice steady, "I've arranged my schedule so that I'm always there for breakfast with Lily. I help her get ready for school, pack her lunch, and we talk about her day when I pick her up. The evening restaurant shift starts after she's done with her activities." As Mrs. Chen spoke, Ms. Rodriguez, still present and taking notes, noticed something remarkable. Other court staff had quietly entered the courtroom, standing along the walls, witnessing what proper justice looked like. Among them was the court officer who had brought them cookies earlier, smiling encouragingly. Judge Waters nodded, then addressed Lily directly, her tone gentle but not condescending. "Lily, I'd like to ask you a few questions, if that's okay? You can keep your rabbit friend with you." Lily looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied clearly. "Can you tell me about your typical day? What do you do after school?" Lily's face lit up. "Mommy makes me breakfast every morning. She makes special heart-shaped pancakes on Saturdays. After school, I go to Mrs. Wang's house. She teaches me Chinese and helps me with homework. Then I go to art class at the community center. Sometimes when Mommy works at the restaurant, she brings me fortune cookies." The judge smiled, noting how Lily's eyes shone when talking about her mother. "And how do you feel about spending time with your father?" Lily's expression fell slightly. "He doesn't come anymore. I used to wait by the window, but Mommy says sometimes grown-ups make choices we can't understand." The courtroom was silent, moved by the child's simple honesty. Judge Waters took a moment to review more documents, then looked up with decision in her eyes. "Mrs. Chen, your dedication to providing a stable, nurturing environment for your daughter is evident. Your work schedule, rather than being a detriment, shows commitment to securing your family's future while maintaining quality time with Lily." She paused, ensuring her next words carried the weight they deserved. "Furthermore, you've created a support network that many working parents would envy." The judge then addressed the issue of the ex-husband's absence, noting the documented pattern of missed visitations and lack of financial support. Her voice remained professional but firm as she detailed how these actions affected Lily's well-being. "Based on the evidence before me, and in consideration of the child's best interests, I am granting your petition for full custody. Furthermore," she continued, "I'm implementing a structured visitation schedule that Mr. Chen must follow if he wishes to rebuild a relationship with his daughter. Any future visitation will require him to provide advance notice and confirmation." As Judge Waters spoke, Chief Judge Williams quietly entered the courtroom, standing at the back. She watched with approval as proper justice was administered, noting how different the atmosphere was from the morning's proceedings. Additionally, Judge Waters added, "I'm ordering a review of the child support arrangements. Mr. Chen's financial obligations to his daughter's upbringing need to reflect current circumstances." Then the judge did something unexpected. She reached into her drawer and pulled out a small package. "Lily, I understand you're an artist. The courthouse is starting a new program to make our walls more welcoming to families. Would you be interested in helping us with that?" Lily's eyes widened as Judge Waters opened the package to reveal a new set of art supplies. "Really?" she asked, looking at her mother for permission. "Really," the judge confirmed. "We need more art that shows what justice means to everyone in our community. Your drawing from this morning gave us that idea." As the proceedings concluded, Mrs. Chen and Lily found themselves surrounded by well-wishers. The court staff who had witnessed both the morning's injustice and the afternoon's redemption came forward to express their support. Ms. Rodriguez approached with news that would bring even more change to the courthouse. "Your case has already sparked important discussions about bias in our justice system," she explained. "The chief judge is implementing mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all court personnel, and they're creating a new position for a community liaison to help families navigate the court system." The afternoon sun was lower now, casting long shadows through the courthouse windows, but the atmosphere was bright with hope. What had started as a day of humiliation had transformed into a catalyst for positive change, all because a little girl and her mother had faced injustice with dignity and courage. 1 week after the courthouse incident, the local community was buzzing with activity. The story had spread through local news outlets, not as a scandal, but as a catalyst for positive change. The small Chinese restaurant where Mrs. Chen worked evening shifts had become an unexpected gathering place for supporters and families with similar experiences. The restaurant's owner, Mrs. Lin, had cleared a wall near the entrance to display Lily's artwork, including copies of the drawing that had touched Chief Judge Williams' heart. Beneath it, a growing collection of children's artwork appeared, each piece telling its own story of hope and belonging. "Every child who comes in wants to add their own drawing now," Mrs. Lin told a local reporter who'd come to cover the story. "They're calling it the Wall of Together. It wasn't my idea, the children came up with it themselves." At the courthouse, changes were happening faster than anyone had anticipated. Chief Judge Williams had formed a community justice task force, and to everyone's surprise, she'd invited Mrs. Chen to be one of its founding members. The task force's first meeting drew an unexpected crowd, filling the courthouse's largest conference room. "We're not here to point fingers," Chief Judge Williams began, standing before the diverse group of legal professionals, community leaders, and local residents. "We're here to build bridges. What happened last week showed us that we need to do better, and more importantly, that we can do better." Ms. Rodriguez, the law clerk whose detailed documentation had proved crucial, presented the task force's initial findings. Her research had uncovered a pattern of similar incidents that had gone unreported, with many families too intimidated to speak up. But now, people were finding their voices. Since last week, we've received over 50 letters from families sharing their courthouse experiences, Ms. Rodriguez reported. Some positive, some negative, but all valuable in helping us understand how we can improve access to justice for everyone. In the back of the room, Lily sat with Mrs. Wong, their elderly neighbor, drawing quietly while the adults talked. She'd become something of a courthouse regular, coming in after school with her mother to help decorate the newly designated family waiting room, a project inspired by her experience. The changes weren't just cosmetic. Judge Waters had taken the lead in implementing new training programs for court staff, focusing on cultural competency and family sensitivity. The court officer who'd shared cookies with Lily had been promoted to head a new family support services division. "We're not just changing policies," the officer explained during a training session. "We're changing the culture. Every family that walks through these doors should feel heard and respected, regardless of their background." Local law firms had taken notice too. Mr. Thompson, the senior attorney who'd spoken up during the initial incident, found his office flooded with calls from colleagues wanting to offer pro bono services to families in need. His firm had established a special unit dedicated to family court advocacy. "What we witnessed that day was a turning point," he explained to a group of law students who'd come to learn about the changes. "It reminded us why we became lawyers in the first place, to ensure justice truly serves everyone." The impact reached beyond the legal community. Local schools began inviting Mrs. Chen to speak about civic engagement and standing up for what's right. She always brought Lily along, and together they shared their story, not as victims, but as catalysts for positive change. "My mommy says sometimes hard things happen so we can make things better for others," Lily told a group of first graders during one such visit, her confidence growing with each retelling of their story. The investigation into Judge Harrison's past conduct continued, but the focus remained on healing and improvement rather than punishment. He had chosen to take early retirement, and in an unexpected turn of events, had written a public letter of apology. "Watching a child demonstrate more wisdom about justice than I did has forced me to confront my own biases," he wrote. "I can't undo my actions, but I can acknowledge their impact and support the positive changes they've inspired." 1 month after the incident, the courthouse unveiled its new Welcome Center. The walls featured artwork from children of all backgrounds, centered around Lily's original drawing. But it wasn't just about the art. The center provided resources in multiple languages, offered support for families navigating the legal system, and maintained a staff of cultural liaisons. Mrs. Chen, standing in the Welcome Center with Lily beside her, often reflected on how a moment of injustice had transformed into a movement for change. The sight of families being treated with dignity and respect, of children feeling welcome in what was once an intimidating space, made the difficult memories of that morning easier to bear. "We didn't just win a case that day," she told a community gathering. "We helped start a conversation about what justice really means. And the most beautiful part is how many people joined that conversation." Chief Judge Williams had made it her mission to share the lessons learned with other courthouses across the state. "What happened here shows us that real change often comes from unexpected moments," she explained during a judicial conference. "Sometimes it takes a child's drawing to remind us of our fundamental obligations to justice and human dignity." The story continued to ripple outward, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted. Other courthouses began implementing similar changes, and the "Wall of Together" concept spread to public spaces throughout the city. What had started as one family's stand against injustice had grown into a community-wide movement for positive change. 3 months after the courthouse incident, the changes that began in one courtroom had blossomed into a movement that was transforming the entire city's approach to justice. The local bar association had organized a special ceremony to recognize the individuals who had sparked this transformation, though the guest of honor was more interested in showing off her latest art project than accepting accolades. "Look, Mommy. Lily exclaimed, holding up a colorful drawing of the courthouse, now decorated with flowers and smiling faces. I made it for the new families coming today. She had become a regular fixture at the courthouse's welcome center, where her cheerful presence helped put nervous children at ease. Mrs. Chen watched her daughter with pride, amazed at how Lily had transformed their challenging experience into something positive. The restaurant where she worked had become known as more than just a place for excellent food, it was now a symbol of community solidarity. One evening, as Mrs. Chen was finishing her shift, a young mother approached her with tears in her eyes. I saw your story on the news, she said softly. I've been afraid to file for custody of my children because I work 2 jobs too. But seeing how you stood up, how things changed, it gave me courage. These encounters had become common, each one reinforcing the importance of what had happened. The courthouse's new family support program, inspired by their case, had already helped hundreds of families navigate the legal system with dignity. Chief Judge Williams had taken the program statewide, presenting it at a judicial conference that drew attention from across the country. What we learned from the Chen case, she explained to her colleagues, is that justice isn't just about laws and procedures. It's about understanding the human stories behind each case. The conference room buzzed with discussion as judges from other districts shared similar concerns and brainstormed solutions. Ms. Rodriguez, now promoted to head of community outreach, presented data showing how the new programs had increased public trust in the legal system. In just 3 months, she reported, we've seen a 40% increase in families from diverse backgrounds feeling confident in accessing legal services. The Welcome Center has assisted over 500 families, providing language support in 12 different languages. Back at the courthouse, the changes were visible everywhere. The once sterile walls now displayed children's artwork alongside legal information in multiple languages. Court officers greeted visitors with warmth and respect, trained in cultural sensitivity and family support. The "Wall of Together" concept had spread beyond Mrs. Lin's restaurant. Local businesses, schools, and community centers had created their own versions, each displaying artwork and stories that celebrated the community's diversity. One afternoon, a group of law students visited the courthouse to learn about the reforms. Among them was a young woman who had immigrated from Vietnam as a child. Seeing these changes, she told Mrs. Chen, makes me believe I made the right choice in pursuing law. We need judges and lawyers who understand our community's experiences. The retired Judge Harrison had made good on his promise to support positive change. He now volunteered at the Welcome Center, sharing his journey of recognition and change with other legal professionals. It's never too late to learn and grow, he often said, his humility touching those who remembered his previous behavior. Mrs. Wang, their elderly neighbor who had been part of Lily's support system, had become an official cultural liaison for the courthouse. Her gentle presence and wisdom helped bridge gaps between the legal system and the Asian community. In our culture, she explained during a training session for court staff, we sometimes hesitate to speak up about injustice. But Mrs. Chen and Lily showed us that standing up for dignity can bring positive change for everyone. The local schools had incorporated lessons from the Chen case into their civic education programs. Children learned about justice and civic responsibility through age-appropriate discussions about standing up for what's right. One day, a new family arrived at the courthouse, looking nervous and uncertain. Their young son clutched a worn teddy bear, reminiscent of Lily's rabbit. But instead of facing coldness or prejudice, they were greeted by warm smiles and offered assistance in their native language. "Welcome," said the court officer who had first brought cookies to Lily. "We're here to help you through this process." The family's tension visibly eased as they were guided to the Welcome Center, where Lily's original drawing still held a place of honor. The media continued to follow the story, but the focus had shifted from the initial incident to the positive changes it had inspired. A documentary filmmaker had begun recording interviews with families who had been impacted by the new programs, creating a powerful testament to the importance of accessible, compassionate justice. Mrs. Chen had initially been hesitant about the attention, but she came to understand its importance. Every time someone shares their story, she explained to Lily, it helps another family find their voice. The changes weren't just procedural, they were cultural. The courthouse had become a place where justice and compassion worked hand in hand. Staff members who had witnessed the original incident often remarked on how different the atmosphere felt now. It's like the whole building can breathe better, one clerk commented. We're not just processing cases anymore, we're helping families find their way to justice. As the sun set on another busy day at the courthouse, Mrs. Chen and Lily walked down the steps together, hand in hand. The same steps that had once felt so intimidating now felt like a pathway to hope. Other families smiled and waved as they passed. The mother and daughter had become symbols of positive change in their community. "Mommy," Lily said, looking up at the courthouse with a thoughtful expression, "do you think we helped make things better?" Mrs. Chen squeezed her daughter's hand, watching as another family was warmly welcomed through the courthouse doors. "Yes, sweetheart," she replied softly. "We helped remind everyone that justice works best when it comes from the heart." 1 year had passed since that fateful day in courtroom 7. The courthouse steps were bustling with activity as people gathered for a special anniversary celebration. Above the entrance, a new banner read, "Justice belongs to everyone," in multiple languages, with Lily's original drawing recreated as its centerpiece. The morning sun illuminated the transformed courthouse, now a model for judicial reform across the country. Representatives from courts nationwide had come to learn from what the media had dubbed the Chen effect, how one family's dignity in the face of prejudice had sparked a revolution in judicial compassion. Mrs. Chen stood at the podium, her voice steady as she addressed the gathered crowd. Unlike a year ago, she now spoke with the confidence of someone who knew her words carried weight. Lily sat in the front row, still clutching her beloved rabbit, now wearing a tiny judge's robe that the court staff had made for it. "A year ago, we climbed these steps feeling afraid," Mrs. Chen began. "Today, we climb them knowing that justice truly serves everyone." This transformation wasn't just about changing rules, it was about changing hearts. The Welcome Center, now named the Community Justice Center, had helped over 2,000 families navigate the legal system. Mrs. Wang, who had expanded her role as cultural liaison, now led a team of community advocates who spoke 15 different languages. "When families come to court now," Mrs. Wang explained to a visiting judge, "they find understanding instead of judgment. They find help instead of barriers. This is what justice should look like." The changes had rippled far beyond the courthouse walls. Local law schools had revised their curricula to include mandatory cultural competency training. Mr. Thompson's pro bono program had expanded to 3 other cities, creating a network of support for families in need. Ms. Rodriguez, now the Director of Community Outreach, shared the statistics that proved the program's success. Court satisfaction rates have increased by 85%. More importantly, families report feeling heard and respected, regardless of their background or circumstances. Chief Judge Williams took the podium to make a special announcement. "Today, we're launching the Chen Family Justice Initiative, a statewide program that will implement these reforms in every courthouse in our state. But more than that, we're creating a scholarship for students from diverse backgrounds who wish to pursue careers in law." The first recipient of the scholarship was in the audience, the young Vietnamese law student who had been inspired by Mrs. Chen's story. She stood to thunderous applause, representing hope for a new generation of legal professionals who would better reflect and understand their communities. The retired Judge Harrison had also come to the celebration. His journey from prejudice to advocacy had become part of the training program for new judges. "Sometimes," he shared, "our greatest lessons come from our greatest mistakes. What matters is how we learn and grow from them." Lily, now 6 years old, had prepared something special for the occasion. With help from her art teacher at the community center, she had created a new drawing, a series of connecting circles, each containing faces of different colors and expressions, all linked by golden bridges. "It's called Justice Rainbow," she explained to the audience, her clear voice carrying across the courthouse steps. "Because justice is like a rainbow, it's beautiful when all the colors work together." The documentary filmmaker who had been following their story caught the moment Lily unveiled her artwork. It would become the closing scene of their film, The Color of Justice, which would go on to win several awards and be used as a training tool in courthouses across the country. Mrs. Lynn's restaurant had become a community hub, the Wall of Together now spanning 3 walls. She had started a program offering free meals to families on their court dates, ensuring no one had to face the legal system on an empty stomach. "Food brings people together," she explained, "just like justice should bring people together. We're all part of the same community." The afternoon celebration included a special ceremony where several families shared how the reforms had impacted their lives. A single father spoke about how the new family support services had helped him retain custody of his children while working full-time. A grandmother described how the cultural liaisons had helped her understand her grandchildren's custody arrangement. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps, Lily tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, remember when you said sometimes hard things happen so we can make things better for others?" Mrs. Chen nodded, drawing her daughter close. "I think we did make things better," Lily continued. "Look at all the happy faces." Indeed, the courthouse steps were filled with smiling faces, judges, lawyers, families, and community members, all united in celebration of how far they'd come and the promise of where they were heading. The celebration concluded with a community dinner in the courthouse plaza, tables laden with dishes from various cultures. As people shared food and stories, the barriers that once seemed so insurmountable continued to dissolve. Chief Judge Williams found a quiet moment to speak with Mrs. Chen and Lily. "You know," she said, watching the diverse crowd mingling and laughing together, "some people say justice is blind. But I think true justice needs to see everyone clearly, to understand their stories, their struggles, and their strength." As the evening drew to a close, Lily placed her new drawing next to her original one in the Welcome Center. The 2 pieces told the story of their journey, from a moment of injustice to a movement of change. Mrs. Chen stepped back to admire her daughter's artwork, remembering the frightened little girl who had stood up to prejudice a year ago. Now, Lily moved confidently through the courthouse, greeting everyone by name, her presence a reminder of why these changes mattered. "The most beautiful thing," Mrs. Chen told a reporter in her final interview of the day, "is that this isn't just our story anymore. It belongs to everyone who believes in justice, dignity, and the power of standing up for what's right." As they walked down the courthouse steps one last time that evening, mother and daughter paused to look back at the building that had changed their lives, and the lives of so many others. The setting sun painted the sky in colors reminiscent of Lily's Justice Rainbow, a fitting end to a day of celebration and hope. "Ready to go home, sweetheart?" Mrs. Chen asked. Lily nodded, clutching her rabbit judge. "Yes, Mommy. But we'll be back tomorrow, right? There are still more pictures to draw and more people to help." Mrs. Chen smiled, knowing that their story would continue to inspire change, one heart at a time. "That's right, Lily. Because justice isn't just a place or a system, it's something we build together, every single day."